It used to be that open source models and fine-tuning were thought to be a losing bet, given how fast the frontier labs like OpenAI and Anthropic were moving. But now, the rate of progress has somewhat stalled, and this has been further exaggerated by the recent US bans on Fable and GPT 5.6. Open source models are now back in favor. To illustrate this, let's watch this interview from last year from the founder of Legora, which is an AI startup in the legal space that's been valued at over $5 billion.
What did Harvey not do well that you learned from as specifically as possible?
Some of the things that we observed were spending a lot of effort on fine-tuning models. And that always seemed to me, at least back in 2023, like a waste of time.
Why?
Also, because the general models were improving at such a fast rate that it felt like we should be building boats, and then when the tide rises, all of our products just get better. And frankly, my initial team, we were 3 people.
What he basically explained was that they were able to move much faster than Harvey, their competitor, because they were using off-the-shelf models from OpenAI and Anthropic that were progressing much faster than any fine-tune can evolve. But just a couple of weeks ago, here on June 17th, 2026, the founder of Harvey announced that they're back to fine-tuning their own models. And they've already published some of the results on their blog. So they fine-tuned this open source model called GLM 5.1. And here on the second column, you can see its performance before the fine-tuning. And then on the first column is its performance after fine-tuning. And it seems to be outperforming the best currently available proprietary models, such as Opus 4.8 Max and GPT 5.5 on the extra high setting. And if you've only used proprietary AI models like GPT or Claude and you don't know what an open source model is, it's basically an AI model where the company that's created it has publicly released what we call the model weights. The model weights are the brain of an AI model. They're a set of billions of numbers that, when arranged in a very, very long mathematical expression, make it possible for an LLM to generate text. So in contrast to proprietary models that are used like a black box, with an open source model, you have access to everything. You can inspect each weight, you can view its architecture, and you can even change the weights to adjust how the AI model forms its responses. Adjusting the weights of an AI model is what we call fine-tuning, the purpose of which is to make the AI model perform better by training it on new data that it hasn't seen before. During training, the AI model is shown many examples of prompt and response pairs, and it learns to adapt its weights and thus change the mathematical equation that we talked about to bring its responses closer to what's in the training data. And Harvey is far from being the only company doing this. For example, Cursor, which is a very popular AI coding tool that was recently acquired by SpaceX for an eye-watering sum, has developed their own AI model, Composer, based on the open source Kimi model. And even though it doesn't quite outperform the state-of-the-art models, it's able to generate code at a fraction of the price. And yes, cost is one of the reasons why we're seeing this shift happen. It was reported by the Wall Street Journal that Anthropic runs on about a 50% gross profit margin. It's also very well known that the models developed by these big AI labs are enormous because they have to be generic and they need to handle basically an unlimited amount of use cases. So with your own AI model, you not only avoid paying OpenAI's or Anthropic's margin, you also end up with a much smaller specialist model that also reduces your compute costs. In general, open source models can be 3 to 7 times cheaper. An open source model can also be very valuable intellectual property for your business. The resulting weights will be private unless you decide to make them publicly available, and you'll also be hosting it on your own infrastructure. And don't worry, this doesn't mean that you're going to be buying racks of GPUs and installing them into your office. There are companies that will let you host your AI model on the cloud, handle all the infrastructure for you, and bill you reasonably by the hour. The funniest thing was that these application layer companies like Cursor and Harvey were being mocked for being merely wrappers around AI models developed by the big AI labs. The sentiment used to be that these big AI labs were providing most of the value add, but now we're seeing the application layer companies replacing them with their own models. And the open source wave is very likely to continue. Most of the AI models, including the two that we've already discussed, GLM and Kimi, are developed by Chinese AI labs. And these labs have a very good incentive to continue releasing these models open source. They don't have the credibility or the recognition of OpenAI, Anthropic, xAI, etc. And there's generally a lot of skepticism around buying from Chinese vendors. The fact that they're making their models open source breeds trust, gets them free PR from Western media, and lets them upsell their paid offerings. And I have one example right here. This is ZAI. It's the Chinese company behind the GLM model, which is public and open source. And this is what Harvey also built on top of. If you go to their header and you click coding plan, you'll see that they're selling a competitor to Codex or Claude Code. And if we go to their pricing, it starts from $16 and goes up to $144 a month. Generally, most of the open source models are released by Chinese companies, but we also have the occasional release by a US lab. For example, last year OpenAI published GPT OSS, which is an open source model, and it comes in two versions, the 20 billion parameter one and the 120 billion parameter one. Generally, the more parameters a model has, the more performant it'll be, but it'll also be more expensive to host and generate text with it. But that's not always the case, especially if you're fine-tuning smaller models. You can get the same or better performance at one specific task at a fraction of the cost. When an AI model is released, it'll usually come in a few different sizes, anywhere from 1 billion parameters up to, say, 400 billion parameters. This is similar to how you have GPT, but then you also have GPT Mini and GPT Nano. We also used to have a European company that was a very strong contender in open source, Mistral AI, based out of Paris. I think 1 or 2 years ago, they had the best performing AI model in the small category. That's under 14 billion parameters, but they've fallen out of favor, and I think they ended up pivoting to enterprise AI. And Hugging Face is where you're going to be finding all of these open source AI models. The URL is huggingface.co, and if you go to the website, on the right, you'll see that they have a list of trending AI models. Here's, for example, GLM that we already discussed. There's another one here at the top that does OCR, which is basically parsing text from PDFs. It's developed by, I think it's pronounced Baidu or Baidu. They're the Google of China. If you click on any of these models, it'll display more information about the model, including benchmarks. And besides models, they also include data sets. So, for example, here, this company has released a data set of Fable 5 responses. I assume this was before Fable was banned, but you can access the data here if you click on Data Studio, and you can inspect the rows. If we go back, you'll see that there's almost 1 million data sets, and with models it should be close to 3 million. So there's quite a bit of stuff here. What's a little bit disappointing is that, as you saw, there are many more models than there are data sets. And that's because usually when an open source model is released, the company won't release the data that that model was trained on. And arguably, that data would be much more valuable than the model weights themselves, because you can derive the model weights from the data by doing a training run on the data yourself. One of the reasons this rarely happens is that, unfortunately, a lot of the training data is copyrighted. Another unfortunate development was that you used to be able to fine-tune the GPT models as well, even though they were closed source, through the OpenAI platform. They are unfortunately just winding this down. You can see some of my past training runs here. It's sad, but also a bit understandable, given it was probably draining a lot of their compute. There are many ways to get data, including downloading a dataset off of Hugging Face, as we just saw, scraping, or something we call synthetic data. Synthetic data is using data generated by a very strong AI model, like Fable when it becomes available again, or GPT 5.6, when it also becomes available again, to train a smaller AI model. There are many clever ways to create synthetic data, but at its simplest form, you could just manually prompt the AI model, or you could release a very powerful AI model throughout your whole organization, save all the responses, and then use these responses as training data. You will also need a benchmark, which is a set of test prompts for you to be able to measure the improvement that you get from the fine-tuning. In fact, even if you're not fine-tuning, you should have a benchmark in order to be able to compare AI models objectively and not anecdotally. There are a bunch of public benchmarks, but I've made a video arguing why you should create your own private benchmark that I'll link in the video description below. Lastly, if you need our help choosing what AI model to use, fine-tuning an AI model, or otherwise implementing AI in your business, you can also book a call through the video description below.